Welcome to the 8A Stars 3 Listen and Learn. This is our third session, and it is being recorded on June 2nd, 2023. My name is Herman Lyons, and I'm a member of the 8A Stars 3 team. Joining me for today's Listen and Learn session is Aditya Takado, the 8A Stars 3 Program Manager at AAGCS LLC, an 8A Stars 3 joint venture. As with all Listen and Learn participants, AAGCS is an 8A Stars 3 industry partner who has received task order awards against their 8A Stars 3 GWAC. Aditya, thanks for participating in this Listen and Learn session. Can you please tell us a little bit about AAGCS and the role that you play within the organization?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Herman. I appreciate this. Great opportunity from the GSA to talk about how we're doing and help out other organizations, do business with the federal government. So AAGCS, it's a joint venture between Orgro and Global Communication Services, GCS. They're based in Louisiana. And so we came together about, I think, 2019, specifically for 8A Stars 3. And I met the CEO, Jonine, who is actually a Stars 2 participant. And so that's kind of how we came together in our network to see how we can partner up for this opportunity. And so that's kind of how we came together. And my job here, or my role here at AAGCS, it's a joint venture where Orgro's an 8A, and we've been performing, doing business, I guess, for over 12 years now. And we are the 51% owner of that joint venture. And so my role is to be the president. So I handle all the administrative work, making sure GSA, and SBA and all the other entities are taken care of, as well as making sure as well as also participating and ensuring that our clients are getting what we deserve, what we promised to deliver on the contracts that are awarded, the task orders.
Okay. And how I was going to lead off this conversation is I was going to ask if you could talk about the joint venture dynamic, as it relates to managing the 8A Stars 3 GWAC. And you may have covered a little bit of that in your opening, but is there anything else about, the dynamic of a joint venture and making sure it works well to manage and ultimately be successful with 8A Stars 3?
Yeah, it's interesting. There used to be a populated and unpopulated, and the SBA stopped the populated. And you have to realize that you can't really hire people to actually deliver the services or the products, but you can hire managerial. So it's kind of interesting right there, right? It's hard to got to make sure that you understand what the requirements are from the SBA to do that. So I think for me as a joint venture, it's also kind of got this mentor protege feel with our member, where they are about 150 people or so, and we're about 20-ish. And so I'm able to lean on them to ensure that, hey, if I'm not sure about something or whatnot, I can ask them questions if they've been doing it well. They've had a lot of prime contracts or whatnot. So to talk about the dynamic, it's kind of like a mentor protege thing. It's like a nice partnership where I can lean on them. So hopefully I kind of give clarity to what you're trying to ask there on how it works.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It seems, and I may be totally wrong, but it seems like JVs require a greater deal of focus, right, based on the unique working relationship. Could you talk a little bit about AAGCS's focus as it relates to executing a successful capture management plan for 8A Stars 3? And what I mean, I guess, is, do members have distinct roles and responsibilities to provide, the greatest opportunity for success? How do you guys manage that?
That's a good question, actually. And I to be candid, we're kind of in the process of figuring that out, right? We are formally, I said I'm the president, but when it comes to like business development, so to speak, and capture management, to use those industry jargon, right? It's kind of everybody does a little bit of everything, and what I try to do is in my experience, try to formalize this, right? Formalize the processes, formalize the policies, or what other word I hear is professionalizing them, so we can have that kind of operation going where it's very smooth. So we haven't necessarily done that 100%. One of the reasons probably why is because, there's just lack of enough people to do that, right? You win a contract, you got to deliver that, right? Then you also have to professionalize the internal operation of that. So you just kind of, there's a tendency for people to, or all of us to just kind of get to work right away without pausing and actually seeing, okay, what is the policy? What is the process? Let's implement that. How do we use tech to implement that better? And then kind of go through that process. So I think that if I answer your question on that, right, it's always amazing to have that, but we're not one of the large businesses who has a huge budget to be able to do that, to kind of have the people in place to formalize everything. So you kind of work it as you improve it as you work it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it sounds to me like you guys, obviously you guys have received task order awards. When I say you guys, I mean in the JV. It sounds like you guys hit the ground running, attack what you could, and you just kind of adjust the cells, or you adjust as you go along to kind of achieve perfection or achieve success, something like that. Does it sound about right?
Yeah, I think so. And it also helps, we have the relationship, right? So with the client to be able to, receive these awards, be awarded these contracts. So there's an understanding of, okay, well, they know us, right? They know Orgro and they know GCS and how we work together. But there's a confidence or a comfort, I should say, as well, that, what, the end goal is going to be delivered and we're going to get what we need. And that's what's really important for them.
Yeah. One thing that I took away from that, I wrote down in my notes here, is, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, right?
Yep.
And, we've seen, we take all these, and when I say we, meaning the entire community that we're in, right? We take these classes and we put these marketing plans together, and we want to make sure things are perfect, right? And it just doesn't work like that. So I'm happy to hear that you guys hit the ground running, said, hey, we're not going to be perfect. Maybe we will be perfect in some spots, maybe not. But we're going to make progress, and we're going to move this ball along. That we'll adjust as needed. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think the thing what I usually say to clients and everybody else is like, it's not catastrophic mistakes, right? Those are different, right? If a website goes down and someone's trying to process their retirement claim, right? That's different. What I'm talking about is mistakes of, we were supposed to attach this invoice to the IPP submission for the IPP submission for March 2023, for instance, right? That kind of little mistake. If you have an awesome relationship with the CEO or the core, then you'll be able to say, hey, you should be able to do this, and that's fine, right? So those are the kind of little things, I would say, operational, administrative mistakes that, as a small business, we are learning, because for us, for Orgro, right, as the managing member of the JV, this is our first prime contract. And so it was really nice to have, a larger company there to help us to reduce any kind of anxiety or stress you might have with that kind of responsibility now. Because before then, we were always subs. So our primes handle
it. Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Awesome. It's a little bit different in the pilot seat, right?
Yeah. And it's a good kind of difference.
Yeah. Awesome. Hey, let's change gears just a little bit, because on these Listen and Learn, we always talk about capture management, marketing plan, whatever that means to different people. But I wanted to see really quickly, one of the first questions that I always ask is your target market, right? So how many federal agencies do you consider your target market, or you deliberately market to? Are we talking about 3 to 5, 5 to 10, more than 10? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I would say 3 to 5. The 25-year-old in me wants to say all of federal government, but I've learned that you have to kind of focus, not on just one client though, because that's just kind of putting yourself in only one person's box. But I would say we're at 3 to 5, right? So USDA, NASA, USAID, Agency for National Development, and DISA is another one. So we're kind of getting up, and that's pretty much enough. When you want to do opportunity planning, when it comes to who are the individuals, who that we need to meet with, what are their needs, not their requirements, but what are their needs, and kind of figuring out when it comes to their technology products and how are they helping them meet their needs, if at all. That's a lot of work, like a lot of work, and it can take up just just trying to do research on what products they have can take up a couple hours, right? You want to be quick about it. You have the GovWins and you have Google, but at the end of the day, it still takes a lot of analysis, right? So I think 3 to 5 is what we have. And I think I mentioned most of those. And then there's a couple of other DoD agencies, that organizations that we look at.
That you keep your eye on. Gotcha.
Yes.
So I'm glad that you brought up the needs, right? Because so many industry partners, are chasing, right? We're chasing opportunity. We see an opportunity here. We see an opportunity in the forecast, which are great places, right? But
yeah,
what I've found is that federal agencies, they have needs, right? They have pain points, and the ability to identify what those needs are, those pain points, to say, hey, we recognize it, and here's a solution to help you. I'm glad that you brought that up. Tell me this, how well, now you mentioned 4 or 5 agencies, how well do you know these agencies? I have a feeling that you know them pretty well, the ins and outs of them.
Yeah, and that's a good question. We collectively, the joint venture, we have relationships with a bunch of these agencies, right? Either we're already there or we have been there, right? So for instance, when I said USDA and DISA, that is actually our partner, the GCS, right? And they have the relationships with not only the program, but also the buyers, right? The CEOs of the cores. For us here for NASA, we both share. We both have our experiences there at NASA. We're at Marshall Space Flight Center, Orgro, and they've been at a couple of Stennis Space Center and other ones, right? So we have that. That's a combination of 2. And then the USAID, we finished a project there as well a little while ago, and so we have the knowledge of how USAID works, both at the DC level, headquarters level, and also at the mission level. I think the difference is that, we at Orgro, we have a lot of programmatic knowledge of these agencies and how they work, but also what's missing is some of the relationships, right? The personal relationships that happen either with, again, the program or the buyers. So that's kind of where a lot of that, capture management or business development work kind of comes into play.
Okay, got you. Which leads to my my next question is, so you guys obviously have work, right? And you obviously are pursuing or taking a look at opportunities at places that you don't have work in. And talk to me about like just the basic 101 types of business development, capture management strategies that you use. I know you talked about personal relationships just now, but are there basic things you guys do? And when I say basic, I mean like emails, maybe white papers, constant contact campaigns, a little bit of everything maybe?
Yeah, I think that last one is there. I personally love LinkedIn, right? It's a great platform. I see a lot of, I shouldn't say I see a lot of increase in government officials, government people using LinkedIn to, either get their ideas out there, just tell the industry people out there, hey, this is what we're needing, right? And they do a lot of that. You don't see a lot of cores and CEOs on LinkedIn, at least from my experience. That are on there. I do see a lot of the program side, right? So these are the people who you'll be working with if you win a contract. That's the people who you'll be really kind of, fleshing out the solution with, making sure it's deliverable, and their end users and everybody who's going to be using our technology products and stuff like that, right? So I love LinkedIn. However, emails is really good. You got to do your research. You go on there and you check the org chart on, I don't know, Department of Interior. You try to find who that individual is. Then you try to figure out what are the kind of contracts that are there and what kind of needs are the services or products are being delivered, and trying to get their contact information as well. But it's also kind of a little bit, you don't want to, it's kind of like awkward. Like, how do you just email them, and say, hey, this is who we are. And it's that conundrum, right? You don't want to be pushy, but you also don't want to be sitting in the back of the classroom all the time. So it's kind of, it's nuanced in that sense, right? So I think a lot of times when the clients do industry days, small businesses offices, when they bring in people from different organizations of the Department of Interior, as an example, that really helps to kind of formalize a lot of the relationships and start that process. So it's a little bit of everything at the end of the day.
Okay. This is the first conversation that I've had, and somebody mentioned LinkedIn. So that's a nice and different approach. Is there any, and I won't ask you to divulge any secret sauce here, but any any basic steps on LinkedIn that you would recommend industry partners to do? I mean, maybe the first thing is just try to, perfect your research and just try to, establish a connection maybe, rather than, send a bunch of messages or things like that. How would you recommend somebody, a newbie, to approach LinkedIn, somebody just taking a look at it for the first time with this approach?
Yeah, and caveat to this is that I'm still learning it, right? So
Okay.
I use LinkedIn a lot, but there's also LinkedIn has a separate product called LinkedIn Sales, and so I use that, and it's a great way to kind of be able to identify who those POCs are, point of contacts are at those organizations. I think that really taking the time to set it up is a to get that. Like one example is, you get a new iPhone and you just start using it. I'm like, no, set it up and see how do you want your apps to look? What's your workflow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to really jot that down. So I have a personal workflow on my iPhone. I have a workflow for Orgro, the company, and then I have a workflow for other investments I make in my life, right? Some people maybe have a rental property or something like that. So what is your workflow, and how are you going to use that technology product to be to help you meet your needs in all three of those areas that I mentioned? So that's an example of what I would say is advice is really just don't dive in, spend the energy to set it up, get organized, and then start working. And I will also say part of that is actually writing it down, like writing down a workflow, right? Writing down what are the steps that I need to do when I want to say enter a new client, like Department of Interior. Like, what are those steps? What are the steps for an existing client? Where I'm at the technology office of NASA, but I want to get into the finance office of NASA and see how I can help them, meet their unmet needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm saying is take that time and effort to do that. Again, it's easier said than done. We all you have to hit the ground running and all that kind of stuff. And even me, I'm still in the process of doing it myself, but I'm realizing that that's how important of a step that is, if not the most important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It kind of, reminds me of when we talk about hit the ground running, right? And I think I used the term adjust the sails a few minutes earlier, right? When in the ship, it's easy to launch the sailboat, right? And it's easy to start moving, and you'll make progress and you'll get somewhere, but it takes adjusting the sails and reading the wind to get to where you're really trying to get to, right? We can have some progress in the beginning, but in order to take a full advantage, have a plan of attack. So
yeah, and I mean, maybe an update to that is, instead of hit the ground running, hit the ground jogging. Hit the ground with a fast walk, or maybe skipping like we're 5 years old again, right?
Sure.
Just something that's kind of like, don't go full steam ahead when you have so much to learn still, right? And or not even to learn, but also so many improvements to make. A lot of times clients, they want you to hit the ground running, so to speak, but I'm also saying, but that's not going to meet you have these pain points. How do you know that's not the problem? Like that's part of the problem, of those pain points. And so I try to do this kind of mental hand holding of, let's focus first here. Everything will be okay. And let's do this right. And that's kind of where I want to start.
Perfect. I like it, man. Hey, anything to share about the offices of small and disadvantaged business utilization? I know we always engage with those folks because, we have aligned interest, right? And we always talk about reaching out to the OSDBUs, et cetera. Any tips on reaching out to the OSDBUs, if that's part of your strategy at all?
Yeah. Come prepared with exactly what you need, like in the sense that not prepared, high level, but come prepared at the detail level, right? Exactly what organization you're trying to talk to, what service or product that it's going to help that sub-organization. So instead of USAID, let's say, the mission, India mission, and building schools for rural villages, rural citizens, right? And how does that help? Like that's very specific for them, or they might be able to connect you with the right people, either the programs or the cores, who are in charge or in the lead of those kind of work to say, hey, I have a small business here. You should talk to them. Secondly, I would also say not every OSDB person is the same. There are some times where some people are really, the word I like to use is activism. There's some active ones, people who are just like, they really connect with the mission of OSDBU and helping small businesses, and other people are not so much. So what you want to do is you want to, again, that's another personal relationship to have, is the individual who is going to really kind of have that active energy. After you put the work in, they're going to put the work in as well. And so that's a big point. I think it's really, otherwise it could be deflating for a small business to do all this work, and the OSDBU doesn't really kind of have that active energy or activism to kind of connect them and work it with them and stay in touch. So I think that's a good one to notice, that to identify those individuals as well that you connect with.
Thanks. And I'd piggyback onto that as well. 8A Stars for Industry Partners never get off the phone with an OSDBU without having a question, right? Before you get off the phone with the OSDBU, make sure that you've asked them a question. And the reason I say that is because give them a task. For example, I think you mentioned it, right? Can you introduce us here to this person? Do you know who's managing this program? And always ask a question. That way you leave the ball in their court to get back with you. And if they don't get back with you, right, as you said, not all are created the same. It provides an easy opportunity for you to engage back and say, hey, I never heard back from you. I'm waiting on, this or that. So always have a question when you call an OSDBU. Never just call an OSDBU just to talk shop, because it typically doesn't work.
Yeah, and I've learned that too, exactly. Because I've learned that, it doesn't really go anywhere. But if you have, especially if you have a specific contract that's coming up, that's coming to close, if there's an RFI out, or there's a contract that's ending, and I know there's a contract that's ending in August, so to speak. For example, I know it's ending in August. It's on our pipeline, and I'm working it from the OSDBU angle, from that angle. There's other angles you need to work it, but the OSDBU angle, I'm definitely working it to say, hey, let's get an industry out there. Are they going to try to do it? To try to, nudge them in that direction to say, hey, do an industry day so we can talk. Because I know the incumbent's doing all this work, but here's a differentiator for us. That's why you should come to AAGCS.
Gotcha. Nice, man. I've just got one more question, and who knows how long it'll go on, but I'm going to kind of combine two that I had put together. Is that the first part of it would be, what advice would you give other 8A Stars for industry partners who, are interested in achieving success? We're almost 2 years. We're almost actually in contract year 3 as of this recording on June 2nd, 2023. But I guess the combined question is there anything that you would do differently? And what is one solid piece of advice? And you could give me 1, 2, or 3, however many solid piece of advice maybe that we haven't covered that you would give to other 8A Stars for industry partners.
Oh, that's a good one. What would I do differently? It's almost, it's the similar thing it's the same what I would do differently with the 8A. I believe I joined the 8A program too soon, because the first 2 years of it, I didn't have a plan, right? And I didn't have, my focused agencies that I wanted to talk to and have a plan and have the people in place to be able to get ready for that, right? So I feel like I do feel sometimes regret, like I should have applied after I'd done that work, and I would have gotten those 2 years back. So luckily it's only been 2 years instead of 4 years, right? So Stars 3 worked out beautiful for us and our partner at the JV. So that's great, right? Because also from that JV, one reason I'll also say that, because also we have that JV, but sometimes the customers are not going to able to use Stars 3, 8A Stars 3 for some reason, right? For one reason or another. So guess what they do? They ended up saying, hey, we're Orgro's in 8A, we'll source those to Orgro. And, we would subcontract out with our teammate. So that's kind of a cool thing that happened as well. So we're able to kind of have that experience as well. So my point in saying that is to plan really for it, and I think that's the advice that I would give for, if you're already on Stars 3, then obviously your planning stage is gone, but is gone, but still do it, right? Because there's a lot more years left on the Stars 3 program, and you can be able to do that. And I think that's really the biggest advice, because when you plan, and then you also get the training also on capture management and business development and whatnot, it just goes so much beautifully smoother. Like there's just a nice flow to your work that you're able to kind of, and then things start happening. Awards start coming, RFIs start coming in, and you respond to an RFI, and then they talk to you afterwards, and then you get a sole source award, boom, and it just kind of flows. And I'm at this point now where I'm like, I'm at a flow now where I do that, and then I go to the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one, So I hope that answers your question. What was this? I think I don't know if there was the second part to it as well that you had.
No, I think I think you covered both of them actually. And between this past 20 minutes we've been talking, I think you've covered them. Really, what I'm taking from you, Dick, is the planning, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
got to hustle, and everybody's hustling out here, but the planning is what I really took. So I appreciate that. And just to remind our industry partners, the 8A Stars program, 8A Stars 2, 8A Stars 3, what we're seeing, or what we've seen specifically on 8A Stars 2, is that it took our most successful industry partners, anywhere from 16 to 18 months before they received their first task order award. And, I know as of this recording, we're coming up on contract year 3. So,
Yeah.
just stay at it. It takes a while. Success doesn't come overnight. And I think all of our industry partners that have been on Listen and Learn will tell you that it's hard work, it's planning, it's preparation, and it's a little bit of luck too, right? But as my dad used to say,
Yeah.
Herman, success comes with hard work and good luck. And that's before
Yeah.
he told me. And that's before he told me. And Herman, there's not a lot of good luck floating around. So get to
Yeah.
work. You know what I
And
mean?
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that. I like that. And there's a term that came out with a colleague of mine or in my network, and it's procurement innovation, right? And
Mhm.
I believe that, for vehicles like Stars 3, Oasis, those kind of vehicles, there needs to be some innovation in how the buyers are able to connect with the sellers, right? And then how they're able to actually purchase from the sellers in a really quick and effective way, right? That's a whole different conversation, right? I'm just saying, but I'm putting that out there as a plug, as as a term that I've heard, and I'm loving it. Now, what does it mean? Details, I'm not so sure, but procurement innovation, like we're innovating elsewhere in the federal government. How do we innovate the buying process? And the selling process. And I think that's going to be important for, the rest of Stars 3, maybe even Stars 4, and later in the future, things like that.
Perfect. And I appreciate it, man. I love it. Thank you for the insight and helping our Stars 3 industry partners, just really get a perspective on how you all approach the 8A Stars 3 capture management, marketing, relationship development, etc. So we appreciate you taking the time. Industry partners, we hope that you found this session useful and have identified a few things that you can incorporate into your capture management plan. This concludes today's Listen and Learn session. Thanks, Adelia.
Yeah, thank you, Herman. Thanks, everybody else.